Hi guys, this is Mrs. Allgood and I am here to teach you about common types of fractures. So you need your 11 by 17 long sheet for this that you got in class, or it'll be available on It's Learning. And so you're going to fill that 11 by 17 sheet in while I talk through your notes today. So you want to find box number 1 at the top and write fractures in that box, because that's what we're talking about here. So at the top here, we're just going to talk about some different ways that fractures can be classified. And so I think you have a box here that maybe says number 2, which says can be, and then this is number 3 over here. Okay, one way we can classify fractures is as being open or compound. So we say you have a compound fracture or an open fracture, and what that is describing is if the bone breaks through the skin. So this is just a diagram of what that might look like, and then this is kind of a real life picture of what that might look like. So open or compound is when the bone breaks through the skin. Okay? If you come over here, the opposite of that would be closed or simple. Okay, if it's closed or simple, now here you see it on an x-ray, the bone is not breaking through the skin. So yes, the bone is definitely broken according to this x-ray, but it's not breaking through the skin. So we call that a closed or simple fracture. Okay, so one way we can classify fractures is either as open or compound, meaning the bone broke through the skin, or closed/simple, which means the bone did not break through the skin. Okay, so we're going to go over to the right hand side of your sheet, and you have this box here that is labeled, I think, number 7. And don't worry if we go slightly out of order, that's fine. Another way we can classify fractures is as complete or incomplete. And so when you're looking at a complete fracture, that means that the bone, the fracture has gone all the way across the bone. It has broken completely, meaning all the way through the bone. And so that's what I want you to write down in that box right there. So the bone breaks all the way across. And then you can see with the incomplete fracture that the bone's not breaking all the way across. There's still part of that bone that is held together. Okay? That's an incomplete fracture. Now, oftentimes, you're going to have some sort of combination of this first grouping and the second grouping. So, for example, this one is closed or simple because it didn't break through the skin, but it's also complete. So you might be picking one word from this page and one word from this page to describe a fracture in real life. Okay, so here you see that picture again. It's a complete fracture because it broke all the way through, but it doesn't look like it broke the skin, so we would say it's closed or simple. Okay, and so on the bottom of this, we're going to look at some specific fracture types, because these are just kind of ways to categorize our fractures. And so fractures was the box we started with here, and then we're going to go down, and I want you to write specific types in this box down here, and we're going to look at 4 specific types. And so I've tried to include the x-rays here so you could have diagrams and real-life x-rays so you'll be able to recognize these. All right, we're going to start over on the left-hand side, so find your picture that looks like this. Okay. This is a comminuted fracture, okay, and what that means is that the bone is broken, splintered, or crushed into numerous pieces. Okay, so you can see that in the diagram here. I've also included an x-ray for you to look at where you can tell that in this case we might say that that bone has been splintered into several pieces. So that's a comminuted fracture. Okay. The next specific type is an impacted fracture, and we see this a lot of times with falls. So this is when the broken bone ends are forced back back into each other, but usually at kind of an awkward position. Like they're not put back together the way they should be. It's just, maybe you fall and break a bone, but the impact might force the two ends of the bone back into each other in an awkward fashion. And so you see that in the diagram here, and then also in the x-ray here. And then this picture you don't have on your long sheet, but impacted fractures are pretty common with hip fractures. So hopefully you can tell that this is the head of the humerus. So when somebody falls and breaks their hip, remember they're really usually just breaking the neck of that femur. And a lot of times in that fall, the two ends are sort of shoved back into each other in an awkward fashion. Okay, now we're going to move on to our last two specific types of fractures. The next one is probably one that some of you are familiar with, and that's a spiral fracture. So when a bone fractures this way, it does so in a spiral fashion, and this is very common in sports injuries because of the pivoting and twisting motions that are common. So like if you're playing basketball and you plant your foot and you go to pivot and somebody comes and runs into you, a lot of times because of that pivot, it'll force the bone to break in more of a spiral fashion. So you want to associate spiral fractures with a lot of your sports injuries and with pivoting. Okay, then we have green stick fractures. And so these are pretty common in children, and that's because their bones tend to break a little more incompletely. They tend to bend a little bit. So if you look at the x-ray down here, you can see that the bone is definitely a little bent, and it has broken, but it's broken incompletely. And that fracture gets its name if you've ever tried to break like a twig that is kind of green in the middle. You'll notice it doesn't usually break completely, and so they thought that this type of fracture kind of resembled that, and so they called this a green stick fracture. So you want to associate that with fractures in children. Now, you've got this whole chart filled in, but I want you to remember the other parts of your ILA. You have a Discovery Broken Bones video to watch and answer questions on, and you also have a review sheet on fractures that will go over what we just talked about. So make sure you do the other two parts of your ILA as well. Bye-bye.